And I'm going to talk about a couple different topics here in terms of do-it-yourself culture, which is, it's really just such an honor to be here because the crowd and the lineup and the people that have come to town for this is just remarkable. And I'm having just an absolute blast interacting with you and meeting old friends and meeting new friends as well. And also this idea of citizen science, and I'll talk about that. And I sort of tried to weave through and dig up some kind of smaller scale projects that I've done with some collaborators over the years that kind of never made the big kind of publication circuit, but are interesting mobile kinds of projects. Does anyone know what this is besides Jupiter? In particular, that. This is the Wesleyan impact, actually, that was discovered by amateur astronomer Anthony Wesley. Here he is, with his equipment. Yes, I don't have equipment like this, and maybe neither do you, but nonetheless, he is an amateur that contributed and was the only person to sort of cite that phenomenon. That was actually his photographs from when he observed it. Give you one more test here. How about this one? This one's labeled, so you might get it. This is supernova 2008 HA. And this, I want you to meet the discoverer here. Here's Carolyn Moore, who discovered this supernova, which actually put forth a new kind of framing of what a supernova might actually be. It actually has characteristics unlike any previously before discovered supernova. And Carolyn's 14. She's at Warwick Valley High School in Warwick, New York. Actually, she's now discovered 2 supernovas, so we're all behind 2 already. And so it's really bad for us supernova hunters. The key point is that we have a long history of amateurs contributing in significant ways to science and to our understanding of the world. You don't really have to take it from me. Just a couple weeks ago, the Nobel Award in Economics, Eleanor Ostrom said, "Bureaucrats sometimes do not have the correct information, while citizens and users of resources do." And I think we all know what they're talking about, that we have a lot of knowledge that could be very useful in higher level decision making, and we sort of know our neighborhoods, we know our streets, we know our parks, we know everything about the world. We know a lot of things that could be really useful, but we don't have the mechanisms to really put them into play. Stick on the space theme for a moment. So we're all familiar with these big visions of let's put a man on the moon and return him safely. Big, strong, kind of bold statement. The kind of humanity at large can rally behind these efforts and really sort of say, let's do that. That would be just a really exciting kind of triumph for us as just humanity at large. The question is, who are the ones that sort of participate in making this happen? And I claim at least things like this, although we've all sort of celebrated these kind of triumphs, it's largely the sort of brave scientists and the engineers of the day that kind of come to the rescue and sort of actually perform the mechanisms to make this come to fruition. So I don't know really, we could sit here and debate probably the rest of the day. I don't know what our big challenges are. Certainly healthcare seems to be one, at least here in the US. We've got economic issues around the globe. There's issues of poverty that have been just with us since just the dawn of time. Ideas around famine and agriculture, food distribution. Ideas around homelessness. These are sort of big problems. They're hard to grapple with. Ideas around literacy, just education. And often we sort of say, we might write these academic papers and we put these keywords in that say, okay, my paper is on this or my topic is this. But, we're not really using a lot of keywords that we should be. We're not using keywords around religion. We're not using keywords around activism. We're not really even using keywords around politics and the political process, but our technologies are not apolitical by any sense. That's certainly one of the issues that I think we could kind of at least somewhat agree on is this issue about the climate and the environment and sort of global warming. And I think that a lot of these problems that I sort of described, they're very large, and I'm not here to purport any sort of solution, but I do have a feeling that the people that participate are going to be not just the scientists and engineers, but the everyday sort of amateurs and people like you and me that can help to come up with solutions to these bigger problems. Now, these problems actually have a classification. Sometimes these are characterized as what's called wicked problems, which is a real term. They're actually very wicked. Not wicked in bad, but wicked as in difficult to deal with. It's a sort of social planning problems often have this sort of contextualization about how to address them. Let me give you an example. So you might have something like, let's say we're going to deal with street crime. So how could we possibly solve this? So we might say, let's disarm the police. That's good. That's kind of what happens in the UK, right? Sort of, let's just have the police disarmed. That will help us with street crime. I don't know. We could just repeal the laws that actually define the crime, right? This is what's happening with marijuana, right? It's sort of like, let's just remove that. It's not a crime. Problem solved. Well, we could substitute some kind of ethical self-control for the police and courts, some kind of other structure. I don't know, we could just shoot the criminals. That would sort of remove the number. I mean, I'm not saying these are good solutions, they are solutions. We could give everything away. That would certainly disincentivize a lot of these issues. I think the point I'm making is, I don't think you can argue and say, I know what the correct answer is. They're all sort of equally plausible in different realities. What I will say is these are sort of societal level problems. And there is actually a framing that is often used to sort of tackle these, and that is this sort of thing called design research. Now, I'm going to kind of argue that design research has a lot of a lot of friendships, we'll say, with art and the way that artists approach and critique things. Design research, just to be clear, I'm not talking about design like industrial design, designing physical things. Design research is sort of an inquiry focused on producing a contribution of knowledge. So you are trying to produce something, just knowledge. You're not trying to develop a commercial product per se. You may do that as a side result, but that is not the primary issue. Design research, and you'll see some of these I think fit in with art. They emphasize problem making over problem solving often. I think artists are very skilled at this. They often are designed to critique norms and expectations about society, which I also view artists playing a very strong role in helping us critique some of our cultural phenomena. They help us tackle the wicked problems. They encourage lots of interdisciplinary thinking because they invite outside experts to engage with us. And they kind of allow for more disruptive ideas. Now I sort of preface this because I want to try to sort of weave a little bit of a example of some types of techniques that may or may not kind of touch on these ideas of design research and bigger problems. So I'm currently here on faculty at Carnegie Mellon. Before that I was actually at Intel Research, where I ran this group, Urban Atmospheres, which tried to look at how can you sort of deconstruct urban spaces and look for kind of opportunities for technology to emerge and play very different roles. And we did a lot of different projects in this space. And I want to touch on a couple of them that are a little bit more mobile in a sense to sort of be in theme with what we're talking about. One thing that's a kind of high-level issue is rather, we try to think, we're not always trying to deal with just the map as the territory. We really want to think a lot more broadly about what that could mean or what the map could mean. So sometimes we engage with technologies, or we do some sort of approaches that don't always have this really upfront technology side. This is a project, a very small project that we did to try to get interested in ideas about love and hate and really like emotional experiences across the city. And what we did is we made these little matchbooks that have a little message that says, I love Portland, I hate Portland. And it invites you to text in something you love or hate about the city of Portland. We dropped about 1,500 of these around the city of Portland. I pretty much went to every bar in that city. So if you've ever been to Portland, I've been to every bar. I dropped these all over the place. The game went as follows. You were invited to sort of text in essentially what you loved or hated. You received back the last message someone had sent. And then sometime later, 5 minutes or 5 days later, the next message someone sent into the system, you got that reply. You have to use the word love or hate. You could not text in, what is this weird thing? It would keep texting you back saying, what do you love, what do you hate? And you get these weird sort of things. I love the blinky green thing. I love all the hot liberals. I love that there are Starbucks in every corner, blah, blah, blah. You can sort of see near the end, this is in the evening where it's sort of, I love chatting up buzz cute chicks. I think I'm in love with you. I hate the teases. We kind of fall into the morning, I think, here with like regular placements of crosswalks. And it goes on and on. I mean, we've got hundreds of responses from this. And it was we're not trying to solve a problem. We're not trying to sort of, directly try to engage in love and hate. We want to see how people think about their city and how they can interact in a very lightweight way. try not to text the actual number on that. I should have given you a caveat. This site is not running now. You can text it, but someone will probably text back and say, who are you? These are artifacts that I cannot bring on airplanes, so this is why you get them here. You can never bring like 500 matches on an airplane. That led to actually another project that we thought about space and mapping called Sachet. This was something I did with Tom Jenkins, where we started to think about, and Chris Beckman, where we started to think about what is this artificial geography of cell towers. We heard a little bit about that today with some of these really great projects from Ben Hooker and Phelan and Raby and others, but we were thinking, how do you move around the city? So here's, this is still looking at Portland, this is specifically, we're looking at Portland for these couple of things. It was sort of, well, there's these cell towers all over, and some, I don't know, maybe the green ones are near where you work, and maybe the yellow ones are where you go out at night, maybe the red ones are where you play, whatever. And you sort of, as you move throughout your day, you obviously switch off between all these, but you don't notice this. It's all handled by your carrier on the back end. But you get these weird geographies, right? So you may walk directly home or take your bike and you'll move through 5 or 6 towers. Or you may take a subway, in which case you are directly attached kind of to 2 towers, missing all the towers in the middle. So the geography, so you have the headspace, right, means that, so like San Francisco International Airport is directly linked to London Heathrow in this mapping. So you get that. We just said, throw away the map. What if that is your world? What if we just look at that as a mapping of your world, and we try to represent your movement through this kind of manufactured artificial geography? And that's what we did. We built these mobile phone applications that let you view and see your movement through this kind of artificial, kind of almost Hertzian space of the world. And again, these you can tell are not designed to be a product. I'm not telling you should buy this, we need this system. It's designed to have deconstructive thinking about the way you move and you map your world. So similarly, another project I wanted to mention was, this is also with Tom Jenkins. We said, well, we have ringtones, and they're sort of, in some sense, ringtones are a very personal choice, but a public experience, right? We've all sort of had this happen. But people have ringtones. Could a place have a ringtone? What does a place sound like? So we did this project called Hullabaloo, where we actually wanted to look at how people might think about a place having a ringtone. So we actually went out to a farmer's market where we had these tables, you could listen to different sounds we recorded, and people put stickers down based on thoughts and reflection, where they thought, happiness was and where fear was, and all these other issues. It's part of a longer project I'm not going to go into, but we sort of iterated on that. We actually designed a second version of this where it was actually a mix table that lets you mix in real time like the sounds of the city, so people would come in and go, yeah, it needs a little bit of bird sound here, a little siren, a little less bickering from those people in the corner. You kind of mix this, and people would really kind of argue about, no, it should have more of this and less of that, and they kind of set the settings and make notes and debate why, certain settings should be there. And the reason is I sort of point out, these artifacts help us to think and brainstorm and ideate about other ideas. So what kind of came out of this was this thought about, well, what happens if you could actually start to move around and maybe your movement actually produced these sort of sounds or rhythms, or you could actually drive kind of sounds around your city as you pass by, and other people as well. So you can imagine you might walk by and you'd hear sort of a dog barking and go, I keep hearing this dog. I don't know who that dog is, but it's someone that must pass by just moments before me, that kind of story. We built this. I'm not sure why it looks Dr. Seussian, but it looks Dr. Seussian. But we were trying to explicitly draw attention to this as a mobile phone. So this is, I apologize, it's a horrible picture, but you could actually, in the box, you would look and you would see an ordinary mobile phone scanning and then producing these sounds. So it was not supposed to look like a special piece of technology. It was like, well, you could reappropriate your phone and leave it in a place and it could produce these sounds. This sort of, we put this in lots of different locations, and this is designed, we could actually leave it for days and days at a time because people couldn't really steal it, unlike some other projects that we had, we couldn't leave outside. But this gives you an idea of kind of what it sounds like. So we actually couldn't, the real version would be that you actually go and sort of say, I want to be a baby crying. Whenever I walk by, I want the baby crying sound, right? So what we did is we assigned people bird sounds. So each person got a different bird sound. And this is kind of what it sounded like. the idea that people could actually get a sense of who was around. They have these reflections about what kinds of people pass by. It was funny, one time I went up to it to see if it was still working, and a woman was standing there. She said, I'm really sorry, my bird is really obnoxious. I'm sorry, my bird is so bad. I mean, she kind of got exactly how it worked. There was no descriptions about what's happening. And all the people around said, we love your bird, we love your bird. But again, these are not designed to be sort of final solutions. They're meant to say, why can't you have, how could you have other people participate in creating new public kind of experiences? And we saw some of that with some projects earlier days, which is also a really nice connection. So similar to a lot of the mobile phone work, we also thought, I think there's this common struggle of what in the world programming language are you going to use, right? This is a dated project, because it doesn't even have all the new programming languages, but this is like years ago, sort of, are you going to do it in Symbian? Are you going to use J2ME? Use Windows Mobile? There's all these different things. We said, what could you program that would just work on any phone? Just any phone. So the obvious constraint is you're not going to use a touch screen. You're not going to use, you know, Wi-Fi. There's all these things you can't use. You can't use Bluetooth. And you could probably see where the solution's going, but we actually did something, a lot of other people looked at this too, but we used Asterisk as a kind of public, it's an open source PBX exchange that you can use to let people call in and then control things. You saw various versions of that with some of the projects earlier today. We did two different variations on this. One was we were running an event much like Mobile Art and Code, and we had everyone, of course, when you register, you gave your phone number. And then when you came in, you just sort of called this number, and it would obviously do caller ID on you. And as you came in, it sort of put you in these little boxes, and it was just a way of sorting through. People had basically said something about if they thought they were prickly or gritty or fuzzy or slippery. So you kind of look up and go, well, I got a lot of gritty people here right now. And it would change. You would just call back, and it would remove you from the kind of queue. Another thing we did was we thought, what if while someone's speaking, we had them pose some controversial topic or some controversial question, and you could call in and obviously use your numeric keypad to vote for it. So that's what we did, and sort of people called in, and in the meantime, the person would be talking, and people would start to change their opinion about whether or not the question was, they thought that it was making people powerless or powerful. This is an issue about engagement and some mobile ideas. And you can see people sort of shifted their ideas around. The interesting thing about this, and you can only really do it once, was at the end, you could say, who's that person? And I would click on it, and I would just call their phone in the audience. And I go, suddenly they're like, oh, hi. Hi, what's going on over here, right? The second time, people don't want to call in, because they don't want to be up on their board. But I'm trying to emphasize these are technologies that are so easy to do now. This was kind of when it was pretty new, but the idea behind this. So another idea is actually, we've done projects where we try to look at critiquing technology. So one was, often people talk about location-based services and privacy, and how are people, going to deal with privacy and disclosing their location, and the technologies will have errors. And we said, what if we just invert all of that? We say, first of all, there's errors all the time. Second of all, there is no privacy. We're going to track everybody. And we're also going to think about how to produce kind of a record of everything that happened in hopefully an unusual way. So what we did, this is a little picture of it. This is at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. They're having an event, and everyone who came in was given a little RFID tag. They had to overtly just say stuck on it, they wore. And as they moved between areas, their sort of number would appear up there. Now, moving down on this kind of screen is actually time. So time is moving down, and a person is a column. So if you look up at the very top, I don't know if I can actually get my little, I don't know if I have a pointer action here, but you can see that at the very top, the first thing that happens, people hit sort of a green area. Green means they went to the bar. Red means they went to the bathroom. Yellow means they went to dance. So you can almost get, this is a picture of what happened that night at this party, right? So first, people go to the bar, then they go to the bathroom, then they got to go hang out with their friends in the lounge zone. But we track where everyone went, and we put them up there. You can kind of look up at this and go, what's going on with the party? When was the moment it kind of waned and it was all over, right? So you can see people come and go throughout the day. You see this kind of event horizon as it moves down. And secondly, there's this kind of artifact where you can imagine saying, what happened last night? Like, well, that's what happened. That's what happened. Wow, looks like it was great. All right, I'm just pointing these out. These are sort of, I really love these projects, and they often don't get a lot of play, because I'm always talking about these bigger things, but these are interesting kind of mobile provocations. And when I actually think about some of the way that we work as technologists and computer scientists and designers and researchers, I think that I actually draw a lot of inspiration from artists. And a great quote by John Baldessari says, the best way to make art is to intrigue and be a bit seductive. You just say, here's this and this, you figure it out. And I think we're seeing a lot of that from some of the projects today. And I certainly feel that there's times where I want to be very explicit and I want to do work that's critiqued in a way that has some measurable outcomes, but I also want to encourage people to kind of think openly about things. So I think that actually some of the practices that designers and even computer scientists could benefit by using a lot of this thinking. Another project that we did, this was with Elizabeth Goodman, was Jabberwocky, looking at familiar strangers. And a lot of you have seen this work before, but I'm going to try to highlight something about it. So that's familiar strangers, for those of you who don't know, just basically familiar strangers are people that are familiar to you in public, but they're actually strangers. So people you don't actually interact with, they're not your friends, you see them every day. It's the woman who always walks her dog, it's a guy that's selling newspapers, it's a crazy skateboarder kid on your bus, these people. The claim is that you have a real relationship with these folks. It's a relationship in which you both mutually agree to ignore each other without any implications of hostility, right? You ignore your friend, it says, fuck you, I'm pissed off. You ignore your familiar stranger, that's just how it works. Society is designed so that at a certain level of population, you don't all invite them over. You don't make them all your friends and have drinks with them and go to the bars, right? So we're trying to critique, exactly as like an artist, so we're trying to critique the technology of what happens when everything's not about friend finding. How do we deal with this relationship of familiar strangers? Now, there's a long part of this project. I'm just going to cut to the chase and say we basically did a lot of design work on looking at how people would actually visualize familiar strangers. You might see people that you'd seen at a cafe before, represented as coffee cups as you moved around the city. You might see colored squares based on how often you see someone or you're co-located with them. You can think of this as a different mapping. It's a new mapping of your city, in which case you pass by a coffee shop, a bar, a park, a subway stop, you say, oh, it's that kind of a place. It's those kind of people. From my coffee shop, from the airport I was at in Germany last week, that kind of situation. The reason I point this out is that, of course, this work drew almost directly and inspired by Stanley Milgram, who had originally proposed this idea of familiar stranger. And he actually looked at, subway stops, and this is one outside the Bronx, where he looked at people and he went back and photographed how familiar people were and things of how well people could remember folks. And we were actually interested in the idea of, well, I don't even know people have as many familiar strangers as Milgram did. And I don't know, we have mobile phones, we're distracted, there's signage. But we actually figured out that, in fact, it's very consistent. Our numbers, and we actually did very similar measurements that show that we have the same propensity for familiar strangers. And essentially, it's because we're voyeurs, right? We're very curious about people around us. We make up stories all the time. That woman's a vegan, and that guy has 2 dogs. I mean, there's no data to support this, but you make up stories because it colors your urban life. Now, equally, we were inspired by looking at how artists had also looked at this concept of the stranger. So, Vito Conci had done a very important piece long before we had looked at this on the following piece, which you're all invited to do this performance. It's very easy to do. You pick someone out in public that's a stranger. You follow them until they go into a private place. So your performance could last anywhere from a couple of minutes if they jump into a cab, or hours if they go in a movie theater. I'm not claiming you won't be arrested if you do this, but please do this performance if you have a chance. We will not bail you out. But, there's a long history of looking at something that becomes a very interesting cultural phenomenon, and artists were there before us. Sophie Call, another person that looked at sort of objects and obsessions about kind of strangers and the people that we cohabitate our urban lives with. And it got me thinking a little bit more about this kind of connection between art and the sort of technologies of the day. And I thought about a friend, actually, of Pauline and I both know, Michael Neymark, who had done this project along with a host of other collaborators called the Aspen Movie Map. This is a sort of video of it, and you could actually, this used a laser disc of this like crazy technology that I don't think people even have anymore. But you can see the idea is you could actually navigate through a city. Seems a little bit like something I've seen recently. Now, the interesting thing to note is that this Aspen Movie Map was actually given a Golden Fleece Award. So for those of you who don't know, the Golden Fleece Award is an award that was given out basically by the government saying, this is by far the most egregious waste of taxpayer dollar ever. And I think it's clear that it's not. I mean, I'm not saying that if Michael Neymark and his colleagues had not done that, that Google would not have happened. Clearly, it probably would have happened, but there's an artist exploring that kind of interaction far ahead of us. And you can kind of go through this list, and it looks like the same technology to me. And now I'm going to kind of rip off a couple of, Golan and I had this discussion, so these are sort of blatantly stolen images from him, but it makes a point. You can look at Myron Kruger's Video Place. Looks like Sony iToy. You know, E-Fitness exercise equipment. Looks like Jeffrey Shaw's Legible City. Google's Google Earth. There was Artcom's TerraVision, for those of you that remember that. The list just sort of goes on and on. A more sort of close to home example, of course, those of you that maybe saw the recent Tour de France got a chance to see the Nike Chalkbot in action, which again looks like the Institute for Applied Autonomy's graffiti writer and street writer. I think it's a good thing that there's these connections. It shows that artists are making tremendous impact. They're just maybe not getting the credit they deserve. And we can even go on the iPhone and sort of look back and find other tilting interfaces, and the list sort of goes on. I did start looking, I got really intrigued when I was putting this together, and I thought, what about wearable computing? Where does wearable computing fit into this? And I thought, again, we could debate where the beginning was in some sense. One early phenomenon was clearly at the Media Lab with Thad Starner and Steve Mann and the likes, and Joe Paradiso and others doing things with shoes and energy. And I thought, where did this kind of start? Where were people putting electronics into sort of clothing? And you can go pretty far back. One that I thought was really interesting, that certainly predates these, I know there's others, is the Eudaimons. I don't know if you guys know the Eudaimons. Back in the 70s, the Eudaimons were a bunch of grad students at Santa Cruz that put together a bunch of wearable computing. They had wireless transmitters, they had a tangible haptic feedback, they had buttons, they had all kinds of sophisticated things. It's running off a 6502 microprocessor. What were they using this for? Cheating at roulette. I love this story. I love the fact that this piece of technology started in illegal gambling. A crime, a criminal act started in some sense this kind of movement and phenomenon. So similarly, I started to look back at these, trying to make these connections. So I was looking back, many of you know I used to do a lot of kind of telepresence work. I made these blimps, a number of different versions of them. It's largely my dissertation work with a bunch of other kind of robots and telepresence tools. This is a long time ago, like over 10 years ago. And of course there's influences from, technology, but also, Silver Clouds by sort of our local phenom, Andy Warhol. But then I thought about, wow, this is so easy to do now. This was a struggle for me. This was before Wi-Fi and all these things that sort of, I don't know, I'm on these sort of plane flights. I look at the in-flight magazines. You can get a blimp for $19 now. I'm going to certainly have an iPhone 3GV with video on board. That's going to happen pretty soon. Someone's going to write a little 99-cent Eric's Thesis app. My whole thesis is now under $20. What took me years and years to do is just 20 bucks. A couple lattes. I got sad. Then I got happy, because I realized this is a very cool thing. This is exactly what you want to happen. You want technologies that are sort of, you sort of paint some kind of a path, and then things become very easy. There's people that are doing all kinds of blimps, and there's people just doing blimp kits that you can get, so you don't even have to buy them. You can build your own. And this phenomenon of DIY is so huge, and I thought, I was digging through actually, true story, digging through my parents' garage just last year. I found this book. I don't know what this is. This was in a box in my house. Not to leave this room, let's open it. This is what's inside. some kind of insane instructions to myself on how to build a very specific Lego construction. Some ship that was so important to me, I had to be able to reproduce it. And you can see these insane notes that I made and all these details, things I thought, that's my first Instructable. There it is. I made this Instructable to myself. And for those of you, I think everyone in this audience, of course, knows, but Instructables is this amazing kind of phenomenon of do-it-yourselfers exchanging knowledge. Now, I didn't have an internet, I didn't have a connection. This was kind of a network of me to me for this one, so it was kind of not so broad, so sorry if you didn't get it when you were 8 years old. But Instructables, right? So people familiar with this, there's all kinds of ways for people to go on and be kind of do-it-yourselfers. There's always a fire thing, right? But I thought about the flamethrower idea for a minute, and I thought, wow, people can just go and get like hundreds of flamethrower ideas. Now, I know how to build a flamethrower. I spent a lot of time in survival research labs, right? We have these rules, you know, sail safe means load-bearing members must feel catastrophically when exposed to flame. Throttles default to max when control signals are lost. But ultimately, I thought about it. I have to have this kind of very specialized knowledge. I had to spend time in this community to gain this kind of reputation to kind of essentially assimilate all this information. Whereas now, it's so empowering to think, you know, we can all sort of participate in building flamethrowers, or maybe not flamethrowers, but, you know, all these fascinating objects, like wearable things and augmenting skateboards, and, well, there's always a flame thing, right? Somehow there's always a flame thing. But this idea of kind of do-it-yourself makers is a huge thing. And I thought about what's going on. It's from proprietary innovation, which we've seen a lot of, to populist innovation. And that's like a pretty powerful thing, and I sort of got really enthused, and I wrote this manifesto for kind of no good reason but the fact that I actually wanted to write a manifesto. Oops. And it's a longer thing, but I want to pull out this one quote from it. We want our technology to sing of not just productivity, but our love of curiosity, the joy of wonderment, and the freshness of the unknown. And the reason I point that out is because often we see products and technologies that are trying to be smart technologies, but why can't they help us, you know, basically be more free or be more curious or sort of wonder about our world in more interesting ways? And I thought this is kind of this idea of like emancipation computing, right? Sort of computing that's freeing ourselves from this restraint or control of this other moment. Now, this idea of crowdsourcing, this idea of DIY is so fascinating. We sort of try to think about even incorporating some of the research we do. So one of my students, Sun Young Kim, she's really curious about electronic waste and sort of what do people think about it. There's a lot of brainstorms, and we had this idea like, well, what if we just put something up on Mechanical Turk and say, I don't know, send us your electronic waste. And so we got it. We got a lot of electronic waste. We got, for about 50 bucks, we got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photos of all these different wastes, and it's fascinating because now we think, oh, this is what people think is waste. And here we asked them all these questions about what they thought about it, and people said, yes, I know this is waste, but I have some envisioned future use for this. I know what's going to happen. And we found out all this insight for $50 about what people thought about electronic waste and how things that even aren't broken, that they just say, it's not broken, I'm not using it. Similarly, Stacy Kuznetsov is another student working with me, started to look at do-it-yourself culture. We've been trying to understand all these issues around what motivates people, and there's part of a much larger study, but I want to highlight one interesting finding that just kind of came out right away, and it's this idea that when we asked people what motivated them to contribute to these projects, it was not things like at the bottom, making money and gaining fame and internet. It was, as you can see, people want to be expressive. They want to be creative. This is what they value most. And this community of all people knows this. But the fact that we've done studies that actually sort of prove this in some sense, and this is looking at many, many different communities that you're all aware of. We've done a lot of work in trying to understand you know, how these communities are going to relate to us. So when I think of DIY, I think of mobile phones. I think of all the things that people are doing that are creative. It's very DIY. I don't know, it's sort of big questions come to me. You know, how important is it to people? Is it some moral choice? What portion of people spend their lives doing DIY? Other things about, is this kind of a durable phenomenon, or is it just sort of popular now? Is it something that people are doing because of the economy or the environment? Is it something you would pass on to your children? Is it that kind of a framing? And just reinforcing that DIY is much more about building than design. This is sort of how I think it kind of breaks down. It's materials come best when they become pre-broken, already ready to be exposed, and kind of really picking up on the rubbish as a celebratory object. Another quote that came to mind: every profession is a conspiracy against the laity. And so I thought about even my role. I mean, I sort of wear a lot of different hats, but if I wear the sort of a professional, you know, I'm a professor here, sort of what's my role? It's like, well, my role is changing from professional idealizer and problem solver to sort of non-professional facilitator of new artifacts. You know, I do see this. We're not the sole gatekeepers, but rather equal practitioners in a loose process where we encourage the flow of possibilities and modalities and are open to learning and surprised by others, especially from the outside our community. And you, in some sense, a lot of you are, you know, braving the new territory far before a lot of the sort of expert practitioners. I'm just going to sort of finish up by telling you a little bit about the lab that I direct here, the Living Environments Lab. We try to basically look at this almost new kind of digital divide between human-computer action, the things you associate with that, and the environment. We try to think about what that design space of technologies that kind of comment or connect to both of them. And one of the topics we've been looking at is this idea of citizen science. You know, this idea of if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. Sort of a well-known quote. And we leverage ideas. Citizen science isn't new. It's been going on for hundreds of years. One of the early projects was the Christmas bird count coming up, for those of you keeping track, where for about 2 weeks, the Audubon Society asked people to actually count birds and basically measure migratory patterns. We're all qualified to do this. That's what's interesting. The other thing is this taps into this idea of the curiosity of people and children and the kind of way we learn and reflect about our world. And the picture is, you know, not just telling me because I'll forget, not showing me but I remember, but sort of involving me so I understand. And when we think about the kinds of sensing that we have, we might want to wonder, you know, is it the temperature outside, or the direction I'm facing, or the way the wind is blowing, or the air quality, or, you know, pollen counts, or if you can stay outside and get sunburned. I don't have any hair, I have to worry about this. Noise pollution, pesticides on fruits, water quality, VOCs in carpets, you know, children's toys and, you know, lead content, melamine in the milk, E. coli in peanut butter, all these issues. But this is what our phone is telling us, just this sort of signal-to-noise ratio. And clearly we're going to have more sort of sensing on board. We know that we're going to have sensing in this kind of citizen-driven content. And people are very good at participating at this. We know things like SETI at Home, where people participated. We know where people measure and report the way they feel earthquakes. We know people that put their laptops online to measure and report that data. We know there's patents filed about, you know, new sensors on mobile phones, such as this is a fertility monitoring phone. This is a body fat measuring phone. This phone has just a whole spectroscope in it. And really the whole framing is to say, it's not just a phone, it's sort of a supercomputer radio station with sensors. And we know that there's a lot of different projects doing this, a lot of people, but there's a lot of artists and a lot of designers and a lot of architects. And our studies have looked at things like air quality for obvious reasons that this is sort of measured now by, you know, government agencies, but you know, this is what these sort of sites look like, but these sort of questionable elements at play. And we've done a lot of measurements, and I'm not going to go through all the projects, but I want to highlight that just we've done a lot of measurements to produce these citizen-driven maps that show very different kind of perceptions of space and time of these technologies. And that more importantly, those data sets and people's immediate sort of measurement of that connects them to this idea of like wanting to actually look at their own cars, and this kind of Prius effect. Once you can measure something, you try to sort of optimize it. And finally, that there's, you know, a lot of different mobile technologies we've dealt with, you know, Nokia devices, we've done some things with iPhones. We've looked at different kinds of ways that might influence signage about sort of not fastest route, but cleanest route. We've attached these things to different municipal vehicles. We put them on some street sweepers, and we're able to collect data across a wide range of the city to see where all the population was for these things. But largely, there's going to be a lot of different sensors. I'm hoping this community kind of thinks about, you know, what will bicyclists want, what will sort of parents want, what will skateboarders want, What will kids playing, ball in the park want? What will people that are doing hopscotch want? And we've been trying to think about all of these things in terms of, not just mobile phones, but mobile spaces. And this is just a highlight final slide of some of the different things where we're looking at water quality, and we're looking at building t-shirts and garments, much like some of Catherine's work, and iPhones, and just all kinds of different ways to think about measuring, reporting, and experiencing data sets that are citizen-driven. Thank you.